The morning of the 20th of May, 1962. The paddock at Zandvoort on the Dutch coast, smelling of salt air and castor oil. Mechanics in green overalls roll a low British racing car out into the light, and one by one the other teams stop what they are doing and come over to stare. I would have loved to be standing there, because the men looking into that cockpit are looking for something they cannot find. Tubes. Every Formula One car on that grid is built around a welded lattice of steel tubes, and this one has none. Just two long aluminium boxes running down each side, riveted together like the wing of an aircraft, with a driver lying almost flat between them as if he has climbed into his own coffin. Some of the onlookers laugh. One of them, so the story goes, asks where the rest of the chassis is. Within 18 months, every single one of those laughing men will be building a copy of this car. Within a decade, so will everyone else on Earth who builds a racing car. The machine they are sniggering at is the Lotus 25. And this is the story of how a car mocked as a bathtub made the entire Formula One grid obsolete. To understand why they laughed, I need to take you back 1 year. 1961 belonged to Ferrari. The new regulations had cut engine capacity to 1.5 litres, and while the British teams grumbled and lobbied, Maranello simply built the best engine in the world and dropped it into the 156, the Sharknose, one of the most beautiful racing cars ever made. Ferrari won 5 of the 8 championship rounds that season. Phil Hill took the title, the first American world champion, though the year was scarred forever by the death of his teammate Wolfgang von Trips at Monza. On pure speed, nobody could touch the red cars, and Enzo Ferrari knew it. He looked north at the little English teams at Cooper and Lotus and BRM, outfits that bought their engines from other people and assembled their cars in sheds and lockups, and he dismissed them with a single curled lip of a word. Garagisti. Garage men. Little mechanics playing at a rich man's sport. Ferrari built everything, the engine, the gearbox, the whole car, in a proper factory with proper foundries. The English bolted together kits. That was the sneer, and in 1961 it looked justified. But the garage men had a habit Enzo never fully understood. Because they could not outspend him, they had to outthink him. Cooper had already done it once, hanging the engine behind the driver in the late 50s and forcing even Ferrari to follow. And in a modest factory in Cheshunt, north of London, the most restless mind in motor racing was about to do it again. Colin Chapman was 33 years old, a trained structural engineer who had learned to fly with the RAF and never stopped thinking like an aircraft man. His company built road cars to pay for the racing, and his cars won because they were light. Chapman's whole philosophy fitted on the back of a business card. Adding power makes you faster on the straights. Subtracting weight makes you faster everywhere. The problem was the chassis itself. A space frame, that lattice of welded steel tubes, was the industry standard, and Chapman built superb ones. But a space frame is a compromise. Make it stiff enough and it grows heavy. Make it light and it flexes, and a flexing chassis ruins the suspension geometry the moment you load it up through a corner. The springs cannot do their job if the frame they hang from is twisting like a wet towel. Every designer in racing lived with that trade-off. Chapman decided to abandon it. The seed came from the road car side of the business. Through 1961, his team was developing what became the Lotus Elan, and instead of a space frame, it carried a simple folded steel backbone, a deep central spine that gave remarkable stiffness from almost nothing. The story goes that the leap happened over a meal, Chapman talking chassis with his old collaborator, Frank Costin, an aerodynamicist who had come from the aircraft industry, sketching on whatever paper was to hand. Take that backbone, split it down the middle, push the two halves apart and put the driver in the gap. Now the structure is not a spine but a pair of pontoons, two long hollow aluminium boxes joined by the floor, by steel bulkheads, by the dash panel. The fuel lives inside the pontoons in rubber bags. The engine bolts to the back. The skin is not a covering over the structure. The skin is the structure. Aircraft engineers had a name for this: stressed skin, monocoque from the French for single shell. Aviation had abandoned tube frames for stressed skin in the 1930s because a metal tube does its best work when it is opened out into a panel and made to carry load across its whole surface. Racing car designers all knew this. Several had flirted with it. Nobody had committed to it for a Grand Prix car, because a Grand Prix car needs holes for the driver, the engine, and the suspension, and holes are the enemy of a stressed shell. Chapman committed anyway. And here is the detail I love most. He hedged his bet in absolute secret. Through the winter, Lotus built and sold the 24, a conventional space-frame car with the same new Coventry Climax V8, the same suspension, the same bodywork. Customer teams bought 24s believing they were getting the works car. They were getting the decoy. Behind a locked area of the Cheshunt factory, the real 1962 car was being riveted together, and almost nobody outside a handful of Lotus men knew it existed. When the covers came off at Zandvoort, the customers who had just paid good money for 24s understood in one long, cold moment exactly what Chapman thought the future looked like. They were holding last year's idea. The reaction up and down the pit lane was not awe, it was mockery. The word that stuck, the word that followed the car all season was bathtub. And honestly, I can see why. Strip the bodywork off a 25 and you are looking at a shallow riveted aluminium tub, open at the top, with a man lying in it. Rival mechanics joked about pulling the plug. The driver did not sit in this car so much as recline in it, shoulders barely above the sills, legs stretched out almost level with his chest, gripping a tiny wheel against his knees. Drivers accustomed to sitting upright in the Airstream thought it looked absurd, and some thought it looked like a trap. The serious doubts came in two flavors. First, repairability. Bend a space frame against a bank on Saturday, and any decent welder has you straight by Sunday. Crease a monocoque, and you are rebuilding an aircraft wing in a paddock tent. Second, the unknown. Nobody knew how a stressed skin tub behaved in a big accident, whether it would protect the man inside or fold around him. The whispered verdict of the establishment was that it was a clever, fragile toy, a typical piece of Chapman cleverness that would break, and that proper racing cars had tubes. The numbers said otherwise, and the numbers were brutal. The tub of the 25 weighed roughly half what the equivalent space frame weighed, yet it was far stiffer in torsion. Accounts vary on exactly how much, and I will be honest about that, but the most commonly quoted figures put it at somewhere between double and triple the stiffness of the 24, from a structure carrying half the mass. Chapman himself claimed the higher end. Even the cautious reading means the same thing. More stiffness from less metal, which meant the suspension finally worked exactly as drawn, which meant Chapman could run springs soft enough to keep the tyres pressed into the road where stiffer sprung rivals skittered. And because the driver now lay nearly flat, the whole car shrank. Frontal area dropped from around 9.5 square feet on a conventional car to roughly 8. In an era when every car had much the same Climax or BRM engine, with around 180 horsepower, a smaller hole punched in the air was free speed no rival could buy. One car, 3 advantages: stiffer, lighter, smaller. The bathtub was not a joke. It was a weapon, and it had found its perfect operator. Jim Clark was a quiet sheep farmer's son from the Scottish borders, 26 years old, with a sensitivity in his hands that mechanics spoke about in hushed tones. He was famously gentle with machinery, smooth where others were violent, and a chassis. This stiff rewarded exactly that. The 25 told him everything the tyres were doing, instantly and without distortion, and he could use the information like nobody else alive. Other drivers who tried the reclined position found it alien. Clark settled into the tub as if it had been formed around him, which in a sense it had, because Chapman had drawn the structure snug to the man. Car and driver were about to become the most feared single combination in the sport. The establishment had one last comfort as the 1962 season opened. Clever ideas break, they told each other. Give it a season and the tubes will have the last word. They very nearly got their wish. Quick pause before the wins start coming. Which era of Formula One was the most inventive of all time? The 60s with monocoques and wings, the 70s with ground effect, the turbo 80s, or the modern hybrid era? Drop your pick in the comments. Now back to Zandvoort. The debut itself was almost an anti-climax. At Zandvoort, Jim Clark put the new car straight into the fight and led the early laps ahead of the field, until the gearbox began surrendering its ratios one by one. He nursed it home 9th and Graham Hill won for BRM. The tube frame men chuckled. Clever, fragile toy, just as predicted. The chuckling lasted 3 weeks. At Spa in June, on the fastest and most fearsome road circuit in the world, Clark and the 25 simply drove away from the Grand Prix. He won by 44 seconds at an average speed of nearly 132 miles an hour. His first ever championship victory on a track he privately hated. That is worth sitting with for a moment. The Bathtub's maiden win did not come at some tight little circuit that flattered a nimble chassis. It came at the ultimate power track because a small, stiff, slippery car is faster everywhere. In July, the circus came to Aintree, the Grand National course outside Liverpool, for the British Grand Prix. Clark took pole, led every lap, and won. In October at Watkins Glen in upstate New York, he did it again. 3 wins each for Clark and Hill, and the World Championship came down to one final race, held over to the 29th of December at East London in South Africa. The equation was simple. If Clark won the race, the title was his, no matter what Hill did. Clark took pole. Clark took the lead at the start and pulled away. By half distance, he was around half a minute up the road, cruising, the championship running to him on rails. And then, with roughly 20 laps left, a puff of blue smoke from the back of the green car. In the engine bay, a single bolt had worked itself loose, and through the hole it left behind, the Climax engine was quietly pumping its oil out over the exhausts. Clark watched the pressure die and brought the car into the pits, where the mechanics could only look at the oil and shake their heads. He climbed out, 20 laps from the World Championship, and it was gone. Graham Hill drove past to win the race, the driver's title, and with it, the constructor's crown for BR1 Bolt. The fastest car of 1962, the fastest driver of his generation, beaten by one loose bolt. There is no villain in that part of the story, only the oldest truth in engineering. Revolutions are easy to sketch and hard to make reliable. Chapman had built the future. He had not yet finished debugging it. If 1962 was the warning, 1963 was the sentence. The 25 came back with its weaknesses worked out of it, and Jim Clark delivered what still stands as one of the most complete seasons any driver and any car have ever produced. 10 championship rounds, Clark won 7 of them. Belgium in a downpour at Spa, where he won by nearly 5 minutes and lapped everyone up to second place. Holland, back at Zandvoort, the scene of the debut, this time lapping the entire field. France, Britain, Italy, Mexico, South Africa. He finished on the maximum score allowed under the rules, 54 points, because the system only counted your best 6 results, and his best 6 were 6 victories. He was 27 years old. At that point, the youngest world champion the sport had crowned. And Lotus, the little garagisti operation from Cheshunt, took its first Constructors' World Championship. At Monza, of all places, in Ferrari's own backyard, Clark clinched the title with the Tifosi, watching a green bathtub beat the red cars at home. I want to be fair to the men who laughed, because they were not fools. They were experienced engineers making a reasonable judgment about an unproven idea. But watch what they did next, because there is no more honest verdict in racing than a rival's drawing board. In 1963, BRM put its new monocoque development on track. Lola went the same way. By 1964, Brabham was almost alone in holding out with a space frame. And even Ferrari, the house that had sneered at garage men and their assembled kits, gave in. Maranello's answer, refined through late 1963 and raced through 1964, was the 158 and its so-called aero chassis. A light framework skinned with riveted aluminium panels, a semi-monocoque in all but pride. John Surtees drove it to the 1964 world title, which means the very next championship Ferrari won after the 25 appeared was won by copying it. The philosophical war was over in 2 seasons, and the garage men had won it, and it never went back. Every Formula One car built from the mid-60s to this morning is a monocoque. The materials changed, aluminium sheet to honeycomb to the carbon fiber tubs of the modern era, but the idea is Chapman's idea. The skin is the structure. The driver lies nearly flat inside a stressed shell. That shell, mocked as a bathtub in 1962, evolved into the survival cell, the single piece of engineering most responsible for the fact that modern drivers walk away from accidents that would once have been unsurvivable. The joke became the blueprint, and then the blueprint became the thing that saves lives. So let me take you back to that Dutch morning one last time. The salt air, the green car on its trolley, the crowd of rivals peering into a cockpit with no tubes in it, the jokes about bathtubs and plugs. Every man laughing in that paddock spent the rest of his working life building his own version of the car he was laughing at. Not one of them ever built another Grand Prix winner around a space frame. That is the part of this story I find quietly delicious. Enzo Ferrari's insult was meant to describe men too small to matter. Instead, the garage men handed him the future, and Maranello, like everyone else, took it with both hands and riveted it together. The 25 itself raced on remarkably all the way to a final victory at the French Grand Prix of 1965, 4 seasons after its debut, an eternity in Grand Prix terms. Only 7 were ever built. Somewhere in the difference between those two numbers, 7 cars and an entire sport transformed, is the true measure of what happened at Zandvoort in May of 1962. Nobody remembers what the fastest space frame of that season looked like. Everybody who loves this sport knows the bathtub. Chapman never stopped, of course. Wings, ground effect, active suspension, the man spent 2 more decades dragging Formula One into the future by its collar, and I will tell those stories another day. But the 25 was the one that changed the terms of the argument forever. Before it, a racing car was a frame with panels hung on it. After it, a racing car was a shell. One idea, sketched over a meal, built in secret behind a locked door in Cheshunt, laughed at in the pit lane, and vindicated so completely that the laughter now belongs to the car. So here is my question for you. What is the greatest single leap of engineering genius in motor racing history? The Lotus 25 and its monocoque, Cooper putting the engine behind the driver, ground effect, the carbon tub, or something I have not thought of? Tell me your pick and make your case in the comments. I go through every single one. I'll see you in the next one.